So yeah, I like to have the two-stroke in these Maximus bottles. It saves me, carrying around great big two-stroke 5-litre barrels. If I have it in the little Maximus bottles and I just spray paint the top so I know it's two-stroke. And I like to get the red one because my poison's blue. That way you don't mix them up. This brush cutter here is, it's a combi tool technically, but it's a KM94. In my opinion, I reckon for power to weight ratio, I reckon this is as good as it gets. It's super light and it's got plenty of power to pretty much do any job you like. I've just taken the brush cutter guard off just so you guys can see what it is that I'm doing and the angle of the brush cutter. I always recommend that you use brush cutter guards, but in this instance, the only person I'm probably going to hurt is myself anyways, so I should be all right. You can usually pick these up for about 500 bucks for the actual combi tool itself, or 550. And the brush cutter attachments are usually somewhere around 300 bucks or so. You'll notice that I've got a bit of, I've got myself a bit of black tape in that here. It's the part where I grip the brush cutter. So I brush cut a little bit differently to what most people do, and I'll show you what I mean by that at this job that we're at now. So you'll notice on this brush cutter, I've got a speed feed head on it, and what I've done is I've just put, bastard. All right, I've just put a bolt through the middle of it, and the reason I've done that is because these are plastic heads and they wear down pretty easily. So by putting that metal bolt on, obviously it just stops it from wearing down. I've got the smaller brush cutter head, the smaller speed feed, sorry, and that's simply because it gives me more line to be able to play with and it gives me more power. So I believe this one here is the 375. But if I had the bigger one, it would mean that I'd have less line to be able to use, or even if I did bring more line out, it's not going to be able to keep up with the circumference of the line. The more brush cutter line you have coming out, the harder the engine works. Obviously, the less you have, the easier it works. And so you want to find that middle balance. So I find that if I use the smaller brush cutter heads, I'm able to have more line out, so I can, I suppose, have a bit more power on it. The way that I brush cut, I figured out I really liked when I first started doing the bevel edges. I like the way they look. A lot of people, when they try to do the bevel edges, they'll do this sort of like weird motion with the brush cutter where they have it on a bit of an angle, and they'll move back like this, and you can see they're struggling a fair bit, and the brush cutter bounces up and down, and you end up getting all these jagged edges. I played around with it for a little while trying to figure out what the best way to do these bevel edges were. What I do is I have it on a bit of an angle, so that if you take a look at the bolt on the bottom of it, you can see it's actually, it's faced pretty much opposite me. I mean, it's a weird angle to have a brush cutter on, but this is how I brush cut. So the brush cutter is backwards. I've got it on sort of, a 45-degree angle from the footpath to the grass. That's what I found works best for doing these bevel edges. It's a little bit hard to get used to. I've got my 3 points of contact so I can hold the brush cutter nice and strong. So you'll see that I've got the black tape here, which is where my hand rests. I've obviously got my hand on the throttle, and then I've got my elbow pressed up against the engine of the brush cutter to give me a bit more strength and stability when I'm brush cutting. So we'll get into it, and I'll just show you guys how efficient it is to be able to do the bevel edge. You're not going to do it for every job. You're obviously going to speak to your customers before you do a bevel edge, or figure out if they want a vertical edge either. But for those that do want it, it does look pretty nice on certain jobs. On the right job, they actually look pretty good. So you don't have to do vertical edges for every single job. It ends up being pretty bloody fast as well, faster than doing a vertical edge. I'm able to have a nice clean line the whole way through. Obviously, you've got to make sure that your customers are happy for you to do it before you do it, but not every job needs to have a vertical edge done on it. And a lot of the time, I don't know if you can see the amount of grass flicking up everywhere, but it cuts a lot of grass in a very short amount of time. But a lot of the times when I'm doing jobs, when I'm doing regulars, I like to try and get their edges back. A lot of the time, the customer doesn't want to pay a lot more on that first visit or even second visit or whatever it is. Me being me and being pretty particular, wanting to have all the edges, nice and neat. I know that if I continue to do the bevel edge, after 4 or 5 visits, I'll have it all the way back to the border, depending on how long out it is. I'll have it back to the concrete border, and then I can start doing the vertical edges from there on. But it just makes everything a little bit easier, and you're not spending too much time sitting there fixing everything up, because it takes no time at all. We're now going to show you the vertical edges as well, so you can see the two different types of edging when you're doing your brush cutting. So we'll take you out to a job now and we'll show you what it's like. We're over at one of the regulars, Sue's place. I like to use the 2.7mm brush cutter line. It's pretty hardy, it's not overly expensive, and it does the job really well. If you take a look at the line, the brush cutter line, you'll see that when you're brush cutting, I don't know if you can see where the dirt mark is there and where it's clean. When you're brush cutting, you're only really using, you know, that much of the brush cutter line. You shouldn't be using, you know, going down any further than that, otherwise you're just wasting it and you're not going to get the desired cut. So a lot of people, when they brush cut, they're sitting there watching the brush cutter head and focusing on where that is, and they don't realize the only thing that's actually cutting is, you know, this part here that's light orange there is the only thing that's really supposed to be cutting the lawn. And if you're only using that much as well, you're not going to go through too much brush cutter line as well, so you're going to save a lot of time and money because you're not wasting your materials. When I'm doing the vertical edge, I'm going to have the brush cutter, I don't know if you can see, but it's upside down. I've got my elbow pressed up against the fuel tank on it. I've got my hand on throttle, and again, I'm just holding where my grip part is here. So I'm not actually holding the D handle, I'm holding a bit lower. The reason I hold lower on the brush cutter is just so I have a bit more control over the brush cutter. Obviously, the lower you are down to the brush cutter head, the more control you're going to have over it. If you're sitting all the way up here, it's a bit hard to, you know, it likes to wobble around. But if I've got it here, I've got complete control of it all the time. So I've got, again, 3 points of contact. So I've got the elbow up against the fuel tank that's, you know, pushing down into it. I've got my hand on the throttle, and I've got my hand down here on this grip down here. When I do the vertical edge, I always do it on the footpath. That way I can actually see what I'm doing. And I always brush cut onto the concrete edge. You don't follow the edge of the grass because otherwise you end up with trenches, and that should give you a nice cut all the way around. If you're doing the vertical edge on the grass, it's harder to see what you're doing. You can't really properly see the edge. And a lot of the time you're focusing on cutting the edge of the grass instead of just cutting to the edge of the concrete. So you're always going from right to left and following that concrete line. So as you can see, we've done the brush cutting here, the vertical edges, and up against the sleeper garden beds over there. Now, while I was doing the vertical edges, this front part had actually been overgrowing, so there wasn't a nice neat line to follow to the concrete border. So I actually had to go ahead and create one. So you can probably see here, it wasn't far over, but it was probably only, you know, 2 or 3 centimeters over. But now that I've brought it back in line with the concrete, it does look a lot neater. You know, a lot of the times we're not that lucky and it's a lot further over, which is where you're probably better off doing that bevel edge to really cut it back or even bringing the edger out. But today we were able to do it pretty easily with the brush cutter. Also done the outside edges just to crispen them up a little bit so that when we run the mower over it, we're not gonna have to worry really too much about possibly scalping the lawn. We don't have to, you know, run the mower up and over, you know, the cliff face of this grass here. So it is going to be a lot neater finish, so we'll get into that now. Whenever you fill in your petrol, you always fill it on the concrete. You know, usually it only takes a few steps to move the mower over. You know, this stuff petrol's worse than poison, so. So just before we mow the lawn, there's a fair bit of grass around. So I'm just going to blow that grass back up onto the lawn again. That way when we catch mow the lawn, that'll collect all that as well, so we don't have to worry about doing as much of a blow around after we finish mowing. And also, you know, after you do a really nice catch mow finish, you don't want to have all this mulch grass that you're going to go blow back on top of the grass anyways. So we're going to do that now so it looks a bit nicer at the end. Usually you'll do that for grass that's a bit longer as well. but I did see it was a fair bit, especially because we had to cut the new groove out of the front. All right, we'll get into the mowing now. Just neatened her up and chucked all the extra stuff on the next lawn that we're ready to mow anyways. But you can see, you know, it's a lot neater now. It wasn't too bad to start with, but yeah, we'll go out and we'll obviously you weren't able to see it because it's a very, very small job. I mean, a few square meters, but I'm always mowing around clockwise because that's what way the blades spin on the mower. So it means that you're pushing everything out to the right, which means the next time you come around, you're going to collect it again as you go around clockwise and you slowly go inside. Yeah, that's not bad for a little lesson on the vertical edging.